At some point, you've probably seen it happen. Someone cuts corners, takes credit they didn't earn, plays the system, and gets ahead. Meanwhile, someone else works hard, does everything right, plays fair, and struggles. And it creates a frustrating question. Why does it feel like the system rewards the wrong people? Why do the people who bend the rules, exploit loopholes, or prioritize profit about everything else often seem to come out on top? While those who focus on doing things the right way don't always see the same result. It's easy to frame this as a moral issue, to say that individuals are greedy, dishonest, or unethical. And sometimes, yes, that is true. The explanation misses something much deeper, because if this pattern shows up consistently across multiple industries, across multiple countries, across different systems, then it's probably not just about individuals. It's about incentives, because systems, they don't reward intentions. They reward outcomes, and more specifically, they reward the outcomes they're designed to prioritize. So the real question isn't why do the wrong people succeed, it's what is the system actually rewarding? So let's start with something simple: profit. In most modern economies, profit is one of the primary signals of success. Companies that generate more profit are seen as more successful. They attract more investment, they grow faster, they gain more confidence, and individuals within those companies, executives, shareholders, founders, they benefit from that success. So if profit is the main metric, then the system will reward whatever actions increase profit, even if those actions have negative side effects. Cutting costs by reducing quality, outsourcing labor to lower wages, avoiding regulations, using aggressive marketing tactics, all of these can increase profits. And if profit is the metric that matters most, then those behaviors are rewarded. Not necessarily because they're good, but because they're effective. Then there's competition. In competitive environments, small advantages matter. If one company finds a way to increase efficiency, reduce their costs, or capture more attention, others are pressured to follow. Otherwise, they risk falling behind. This creates kind of a race. Not necessarily to be the most ethical or the most beneficial, but to be the most competitive. And in that race, strategies that provide an edge tend to spread, even if they're not ideal, because choosing not to adopt them can come at a cost. Over time, the system can drift towards behaviors that are optimized for winning within the system, even if they're not necessarily aligned with broader values. Then, there's the issue of visibility. Success is visible. Failure, not so much. You see the people who make it, the entrepreneurs who succeed, the investors who profit, the individuals who rise to the top. But you don't see the many people who take similar risks and don't succeed. This creates a very skewed perception. It can make it seem like certain behaviors are more reliable than they actually are, and it can reinforce the idea that success is tied to specific traits, even when luck, timing, and context play a significant role. Then there's the role of networks. Opportunities aren't distributed evenly. Access to resources, information, and connections can make a significant difference. People who are already in advantageous positions often have easier access to further opportunities, better education, stronger professional networks, financial support, and those advantages can compound over time. So when someone succeeds, it's not always just about their individual actions. It's also about the environment they're operating in, and that environment can shape outcomes in ways that aren't immediately visible. Then there's risk. Not all risks are equal. For some people, taking a risk can lead to significant rewards. For others, the consequences of failure are much higher. If you have financial security, social support, or a safety net, you can afford to take bigger risks. If you don't, you might have to be more cautious. So the system can end up rewarding those who are in a position to take risks, even if the underlying behavior is the same. Then there's accountability. In large systems, responsibility can become diffuse. Decisions are made across layers of management, organizations, and institutions, which can make it harder to assign responsibility for negative outcomes. And when accountability is limited, there's less incentive to avoid harmful behavior, especially if that behavior leads to positive results within the system's metrics. Then there's the short term. Many systems prioritize short-term results, quarterly earnings, immediate performance metrics, short-term growth. And when the focus is on the short term, Actions that produce quick gains are often rewarded, even if they end up creating long-term problems. Cutting corners can boost short-term performance. Investing in long-term stability, it might not show immediate results. So the system simply favors decisions that look good now, even if they're not sustainable. And of course, there's perception. Now, in many cases, how something appears can matter just as much as what it actually is. Confidence, presentation, and narrative can all influence how people are perceived, which can in turn affect opportunities, trust, and success. This doesn't mean that substance doesn't matter, but it does mean that perception plays a role, and people who are skilled at managing perception can benefit from that. Then there's the idea of alignment. If your personal values align with the system's incentives, you are much more likely to succeed within it. If they don't, well, you might end up facing trade-offs. You might choose not to pursue certain opportunities, or you might approach them differently. And that can affect outcomes, not because one approach is inherently better, but because the system rewards certain behaviors over others. All of this contributes to a pattern, where the people who succeed are often the ones who are best aligned with the system's incentives. Not necessarily the most ethical, not necessarily the most deserving, but the most optimized for the environment that they're in, and that can create a disconnect between what people believe should be rewarded and what actually is. Because most people value things like fairness, integrity, and contribution, but most systems, they often prioritize efficiency, growth, and measurable outcomes, and those priorities don't always overlap. So when you see someone succeed through behavior that doesn't necessarily align with your values, it can feel like the system is broken. But in many cases, it's actually working exactly as designed. It's rewarding the behaviors that lead to the outcomes it prioritizes, even if those outcomes don't reflect broader values. So what does that all mean? Well, it doesn't mean that ethics don't matter, or that good behavior is pointless, but it does mean that individual actions exist within a larger structure, a structure that shapes incentives, opportunities, and outcomes. And understanding that structure can change how you interpret what you see, because instead of asking, why are the wrong people winning, you can ask, what is the system actually rewarding? And that question can lead to a deeper understanding of why certain patterns emerge, of why certain behaviors are common, and of why change can be difficult. Because changing outcomes often requires changing incentives. And changing incentives means changing the system, which is complex, challenging, and often slow. But it means that the patterns you see aren't random. They're the result of how the system is structured. And reorganizing that is the first step toward understanding it. Because once you see the incentives, you start to see the logic behind the outcomes, even when those outcomes don't align with what you think should happen. And that doesn't make it any less frustrating, but it does make it much more clear. Because the system doesn't reward people based on who they are. It rewards them based on what they do within the rules it sets. And if those rules prioritize certain outcomes, well, then the people who deliver those outcomes are the ones who rise, even if they're not the ones you'd expect, or the ones you'd necessarily choose. And that's why it can feel like the system rewards the wrong people, because it's not necessarily rewarding the best people, it's rewarding the best fit for the system as it exists. And until that system changes, the pattern is likely to continue.